Before we begin, if you are serious about strengthening your spirit, overcoming the desires of the flesh, and learning how to walk with God every single day, I want to invite you to get our special eBook, 365 Days of Spiritual Victory, Daily Prayers for the Battle Between Spirit and Flesh. Inside, you will find 365 powerful daily prayers designed to help you strengthen your relationship with God, resist temptation, renew your mind, and walk in the power of the Holy Spirit throughout the entire year. If you want to make prayer and spiritual victory part of your daily life, click the link in the comments and get your copy today. Now let us go deeper into one of the most important spiritual battles every believer must understand. You wake up exhausted even after sleeping. Your body feels heavy. Your mind feels crowded. Motivation comes and goes, and sometimes it feels like everything that once mattered now feels distant or blurred. You try to rest, but rest doesn't restore you. You try to push forward, but something invisible keeps pulling you back. And somewhere inside, a quiet voice keeps asking the same question. Why does life feel harder than it should? Most people will tell you you're just tired, burned out, overworked, stressed. They'll recommend vitamins, vacations, or distractions. And while those things may help temporarily, they don't touch the root of what's happening. Because what you're experiencing isn't physical exhaustion, it's spiritual exhaustion. And more than that, it's spiritual resistance. There is a battle taking place that most people never see, never recognize, and never prepare for. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't always come with obvious temptation or dramatic suffering. Sometimes it comes as numbness, sometimes as confusion, sometimes as sudden discouragement, sometimes as a quiet voice that whispers, "What's the point?" This is how spiritual warfare works. Not with explosions, but with erosion. Not with chaos, but with subtle draining. Not with fear, but with fatigue. The reason this feels so heavy is because you are not just fighting circumstances. You are resisting something that does not want you awake, aligned, or spiritually alert. And the more aware you become, the more intense the resistance feels. That's why the tiredness feels different. It's not the tiredness of effort, it's the tiredness of opposition. There is a reason you feel most drained when you try to grow. There is a reason clarity often comes with exhaustion. There is a reason peace feels hardest to hold on to when you're closest to breakthrough. And no one talks about this enough. This message is not meant to scare you. It's meant to wake you up. Because once you understand what's really happening, everything changes. You stop blaming yourself. You stop thinking you're weak. You stop thinking something is wrong with you. You realize the truth: you are not tired. You are engaged in a spiritual war. And the first step to winning is understanding what the battle actually is. The invisible war, draining your energy. Most people imagine spiritual warfare as something dramatic: temptation, fear, suffering, or visible moral struggle. But the most dangerous form of spiritual warfare is quiet. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It doesn't attack you head on. It slowly drains you until you forget who you are and why you're here. The enemy's most effective strategy is not to destroy you outright, but to exhaust you emotionally, mentally, and spiritually until you surrender without realizing it. This is why so many strong people feel tired without knowing why. This is why people who pray still feel heavy. This is why motivated souls suddenly lose direction. Spiritual exhaustion doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from resisting something unseen for too long without understanding the battle. When you are spiritually sensitive, when you seek truth, meaning, growth, or purpose, you become more aware of life's deeper layers. That awareness makes you stronger, but it also makes you more targeted. Not by fate, not by coincidence, but by the natural tension between growth and resistance. Every step toward clarity creates friction. Every step toward alignment exposes what no longer belongs. Every step toward truth disturbs what thrives in confusion. That disturbance creates pressure, and pressure, when misunderstood, feels like fatigue. But here's what most people don't realize. Spiritual tiredness is not a sign of weakness. It is often a sign of advancement. When you begin to grow internally, your mind and spirit start rejecting patterns that once felt normal. Old habits no longer satisfy you. Shallow conversations drain you. Noise becomes unbearable. You crave stillness, depth, and meaning, yet those same things feel harder to reach. This inner tension is exhausting because you are caught between two states, who you used to be and who you are becoming, and that space between them is uncomfortable. It's where doubts rise. It's where old thoughts try to return. It's where fear whispers that you're losing something. But what you're actually losing is what no longer serves you. And loss, even of unhealthy things, takes energy. Spiritual warfare often disguises itself as emotional heaviness. You may feel unmotivated for no logical reason. Your body feels heavy, even when nothing is physically wrong. You feel disconnected from joy, yet not depressed. You feel restless, yet tired. That's because the battle is not in your body. It's not even in your mind. It's in your awareness. You are being pulled in two directions, toward growth and toward comfort. Toward clarity and toward distraction, toward purpose and toward numbness, and the mind reacts to this tension as fatigue. Another sign of spiritual warfare is sudden mental noise, thoughts that don't feel like yours, doubts that arrive uninvited, old fears resurfacing for no clear reason, a quiet sense of urgency mixed with confusion. This isn't random. When you begin to detach from lower patterns, fear, dependence, external validation, something inside you resists that change. The ego resists it. Old identities resist it. Even people around you may unknowingly resist it, because your growth challenges their comfort. And all of that pressure accumulates. That's why rest alone doesn't fix it. Sleep restores the body. Distraction numbs the mind, but only awareness restores the spirit. This is why so many people feel tired even after resting, because the fatigue isn't physical, it's spiritual friction. The moment you start questioning your life, your habits, your purpose, your relationships, the moment you start asking deeper questions, you step into a battlefield that most people never enter consciously. And here's the truth most never hear. If you were truly weak, there would be no resistance. If you were insignificant, nothing would oppose your growth. If you had no potential, nothing would try to slow you down. The struggle itself is evidence of your strength. Spiritual warfare is not about demons or darkness in the dramatic sense people imagine. It's about influence, attention, energy, direction. It's about what gets to shape your thoughts when you're tired, what voice you listen to when you're discouraged, what path you choose when clarity feels distant. The enemy of your growth doesn't need to destroy you. It only needs to distract you long enough for you to give up. That's why exhaustion is such a powerful tool. A tired person doubts more. A tired person quits faster. A tired person accepts less than they deserve, and that is exactly why you must understand this moment in your life differently. You are not failing. You are not lost. You are not weak. You are in transition, and transitions are always exhausting. But here's the most important truth of all. The fatigue you feel now is not permanent. It's the sign that something old is breaking and something new is forming. If you were meant to stay where you are, there would be no tension. If you were meant to remain asleep, there would be no discomfort. If you were meant to stop growing, there would be no resistance. The war you feel is proof that you are moving forward, and once you understand that, everything changes. You stop fighting yourself. You stop blaming your exhaustion. You stop thinking something is wrong with you. Instead, you learn how to stand firm, how to protect your energy, how to rest without surrendering, how to move forward without burning out. And that's exactly what we'll go deeper into next, because once you understand the nature of this battle, you'll realize something powerful. You were never meant to lose it. If this message is helping you see your situation more clearly, make sure to subscribe to the channel. What comes next will help you understand how to protect your energy, regain your strength, and walk through this spiritual battle with clarity and confidence. The second layer of this battle reveals itself when you begin to notice how your thoughts behave when you are tired. Not just physically tired, but spiritually worn down. The mind becomes louder. Doubt becomes more convincing. Old fears suddenly feel relevant again. You start questioning things you were once certain about. Your confidence weakens. Your patience shortens. Your inner peace becomes fragile. This is not coincidence. When the spirit grows weary, the mind becomes vulnerable. And when the mind becomes vulnerable, it becomes a battlefield. Spiritual warfare does not begin with temptation. It begins with subtle mental erosion. A thought here, a feeling there, a sense of heaviness you can't explain. A voice that says, maybe you're doing too much, or maybe this path isn't worth it, or maybe you're just fooling yourself. These thoughts don't arrive violently, they arrive gently. They sound reasonable, they sound logical. That is what makes them dangerous. The greatest trick is not to push you into darkness, but to convince you to dim your own light. When you're spiritually alert, you can recognize these thoughts as passing noise. But when you're tired, you start listening to them. You start believing them. You start letting them shape your decisions. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to pull away from what once gave you strength. You pray less. You reflect less. You feel less connected. You stop trusting your intuition. You start living on autopilot. This is how the battle is won against most people, not through destruction, but through distraction and fatigue. The mind under pressure seeks comfort. It looks for escape. It looks for something easy, something familiar, something that doesn't require effort or awareness. And in that search, it often returns to old patterns that once numbed pain, but never healed it. That's why exhaustion often leads people backward instead of forward. And here's something few people understand. Not all tiredness comes from doing too much. Sometimes it comes from resisting growth. When your life is trying to move forward and you cling to what's familiar, that inner resistance drains enormous energy. Your soul wants expansion. Your habits want safety. Your spirit wants depth. Your ego wants control. That internal conflict is exhausting. And when it lasts long enough, it feels like burnout. But it's not burnout. It's misalignment. This is why people who are deeply spiritual often feel tired in ways others can't understand. They're not just dealing with responsibilities, they're navigating inner transformation. They're shedding old identities. They're questioning beliefs. They're redefining meaning. They're becoming more conscious, and consciousness requires energy. The more aware you become, the harder it is to ignore what feels wrong. The more you grow, the harder it is to pretend. The more sensitive you become, the more you feel everything. That sensitivity is not weakness, it's a sign of depth. But if you don't learn how to protect your mind during this phase, you will confuse growth with suffering and clarity with exhaustion. This is where many people give up. They think something is wrong with them. They think they've lost their strength. They think their faith is fading. But the truth is, they're standing in the middle of a transformation they don't yet understand. Spiritual warfare intensifies right before breakthroughs, not because something evil is chasing you, but because your old self is dissolving. And the mind resists dissolution more than pain. Your mind wants consistency. Your spirit wants evolution. That conflict creates fatigue. Another sign you're in a spiritual battle is the strange feeling of being pulled in multiple directions at once. You want peace, but your thoughts race. You want silence, but your mind won't stop. You want clarity, but everything feels foggy. This happens when your awareness is expanding faster than your habits can adjust. You are outgrowing old patterns, but you haven't fully stepped into new ones yet. That in-between state is uncomfortable, unstable, draining, but it is also sacred, because it means something is shifting. People often think spiritual growth feels uplifting all the time. In reality, it often feels like shedding skin. It feels like confusion before clarity. It feels like loneliness before connection. It feels like exhaustion before renewal. And this is why rest alone doesn't fix it. You can sleep 8 hours and still feel tired. You can take days off and still feel heavy. You can escape for a while and still feel empty. Because the tiredness isn't coming from your schedule, it's coming from your inner realignment. The mind wants certainty. The spirit moves through surrender. And surrender is exhausting for the ego. The ego wants control. The ego wants answers. The ego wants reassurance. But growth requires trust. And trust requires letting go. This is where many people panic. They try to regain control. They distract themselves. They fill silence with noise. They numb themselves with activity. But that only delays the process. The tiredness remains because the lesson remains. The truth is, when you are in a spiritual battle, rest alone is not enough. You need grounding. You need clarity. You need intentional stillness. You need to reconnect with what anchors you. Not distraction, not avoidance, not numbing, but presence, because presence restores energy. Presence quiets the mind. Presence reminds you who you are. When you slow down and listen, truly listen, you begin to notice something important. The exhaustion lessens when you stop fighting it, when you stop judging it, when you stop trying to escape it. The fatigue is asking you to pause, to reflect, to realign, not to quit. And this is the part few people understand. The spiritual battle isn't about pushing harder. It's about becoming more aware. Awareness dissolves fear. Awareness exposes false thoughts. Awareness weakens the inner noise. The moment you stop identifying with every tired thought, it loses power. The moment you stop believing every doubt, clarity returns. The moment you stop resisting the process, peace begins to grow. You are not meant to carry everything alone. You are not meant to have every answer. You are not meant to force clarity. You are meant to walk through this season with patience, because this phase does not last forever. Every spiritual shift has a phase of discomfort. Every awakening comes with confusion. Every breakthrough is preceded by pressure. The pressure you feel now is not punishment. It is preparation. You are being refined, not rejected. You are being strengthened, not drained. You are being realigned, not broken. And the more you understand this, the less power the exhaustion has over you. You stop fearing it. You stop running from it. You start listening to what it's teaching you. And that is when the battle begins to change. Because awareness is the first step toward victory. If this message is helping you understand what you've been feeling, make sure to subscribe to the channel. What comes next will show you how to regain your strength, protect your mind, and move through this spiritual battle without losing yourself. The third stage of this battle begins when you realize that the exhaustion you feel is no longer coming from external pressures, but from something much deeper. It is the moment when silence itself starts to feel heavy, when being alone no longer feels restful but confrontational, when distractions stop working and the mind no longer finds relief in noise. This is the point where many people think something is wrong with them, when in reality something very important is happening. This is the moment the battle turns inward. There are no longer visible struggles to blame, no clear enemies, no obvious obstacles, just a strange tension inside, a sense that something is shifting beneath the surface. Thoughts appear out of nowhere, old memories resurface without warning. Emotions you believed were resolved return quietly, asking to be felt again. You may feel restless, unsettled, or emotionally tired without being able to explain why. This phase confuses many people because it does not feel like progress. It feels like stagnation. But in truth, It is the beginning of inner restructuring. When spiritual growth deepens, the mind begins to lose its old reference points. The identities you once used to define yourself start to weaken. The beliefs that once felt solid begin to feel insufficient. The coping mechanisms that once helped you survive no longer work. And the mind, which depends on familiarity to feel safe, reacts with resistance. That resistance often shows up as fatigue, not physical tiredness, but a deep weariness of thought, a heaviness in decision-making, a lack of motivation for things that once mattered, a sense of being suspended between who you were and who you are becoming. This is not failure, this is transformation. But transformation is uncomfortable because it requires letting go of certainty. It requires staying present in the unknown. And the human mind does not like uncertainty. It wants answers, explanations, timelines, guarantees. When it cannot find them, it creates tension. That tension is what you are feeling. It is important to understand that this phase does not mean you are losing your strength. It means your strength is being restructured. You are no longer operating on instinct or habit. You are being invited to operate on awareness. This is where many people turn back. Not because they are weak, but because they misinterpret the discomfort. They assume that if growth were real, it would feel good all the time. They believe that peace should always feel calm and light. But true inner development often feels like standing still while everything inside you rearranges itself. The mind wants to rush past this stage. It wants resolution. It wants closure. But the soul works differently. The soul works through integration. And integration cannot be rushed. This is why forcing positivity during this phase only makes things worse. Pretending to be fine when you are not. Forcing motivation when your energy is low. Trying to think your way out of something that must be felt. All of that creates more inner conflict. The exhaustion deepens because you are fighting the very process meant to heal you. What you are experiencing is not a breakdown. It is a breakdown of old patterns that no longer serve you. And breakdowns feel chaotic because structure is dissolving before something stronger takes its place. This is the phase where awareness becomes essential. You begin to notice how often your thoughts repeat themselves, how quickly your mind jumps to worry, how easily fear disguises itself as logic, how often you judge yourself for not being further along. And in noticing, something powerful happens. You stop being fully identified with those thoughts. You begin to observe instead of react. This is the turning point. Because the moment you observe a thought rather than believe it, its power weakens. The moment you allow a feeling without resisting it, it begins to move through you instead of staying trapped inside. The exhaustion starts to lift, not because your problems disappear, but because you stop carrying them unconsciously. This stage teaches you a deep lesson. Not all tiredness means you need to stop. Sometimes it means you need to stop fighting yourself. When you stop fighting, energy returns naturally. When you stop demanding clarity, clarity slowly emerges. When you stop forcing progress, growth continues on its own. This is also the stage where you realize that silence is not emptiness. Silence is information. It reveals what noise has been covering up. It shows you where you are still holding tension. It reveals what you have been avoiding. And yes, this can feel uncomfortable, but it is also where real strength is born. Not the loud kind, not the forceful kind, but the quiet, stable strength that does not depend on circumstances. You begin to realize that you do not need to be constantly motivated. You do not need to feel inspired every day. You do not need to have everything figured out. You only need to stay present. Presence grounds you. Presence restores you. Presence protects you from spiraling into fear. This is the stage where many people think they are losing faith, when in fact their faith is becoming deeper and more internal. less dependent on emotion, less dependent on external validation, more rooted in understanding. And that kind of faith is unshakable. The tiredness you feel now is not asking you to quit. It is asking you to slow down enough to integrate what you are becoming. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not failing. You are in the middle of an inner shift that requires patience, honesty, and self-compassion. And once you pass through this phase, something changes. The mind becomes quieter. The body feels lighter. The emotional weight begins to lift. The constant tension fades, not because life becomes easier, but because you become steadier. You stop being shaken by every thought. You stop being pulled by every emotion. You stop doubting yourself at every turn. You begin to move with clarity instead of urgency. And that is when the battle starts to turn in your favor. Because the greatest victory in a spiritual war is not overpowering something outside of you. It is learning how to remain centered within. If this message resonates with you and you feel this process unfolding in your own life, make sure to subscribe to the channel. The next part will show you how to protect your energy, stabilize your mind, and move forward without losing yourself in the process. At this stage of the journey, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. You start to realize that the battle is no longer loud. It doesn't feel dramatic anymore. The chaos has quieted, but not in a peaceful way. It is a stillness filled with tension, like the moment before a storm breaks or the deep silence before dawn. This is where many people misinterpret what is happening and assume they are stuck, empty, or disconnected. In reality, this is the point where the real transformation begins. This is the phase where the old self loosens its grip, not suddenly, not violently, but gradually, layer by layer. You may notice that things that once triggered you no longer have the same power. Situations that once drained you now feel distant. Conversations that once pulled you into conflict now feel hollow. You start to feel slightly detached from the noise of the world, as if you are observing life instead of being swallowed by it. And yet at the same time, you may feel strangely vulnerable. Because when the old defenses fall away, you are left with yourself. No distractions, no masks, no familiar emotional reactions to hide behind. Just awareness. This is where many people grow uncomfortable. The mind wants stimulation. It wants certainty. It wants something to hold on to. But the deeper the transformation, the more you are invited to let go of external anchors. You begin to sense that peace cannot come from control, from validation, or from constant movement. It must come from something much quieter. This is often when people describe feeling empty, but emptiness is not the right word. It is space. Space that was once filled with noise, space that was once filled with fear, space that was once filled with constant mental chatter, and space can feel unsettling if you are not used to it. The ego interprets this space as loss, the soul recognizes it as freedom. This is where the spiritual battle becomes subtle but intense, not because something is attacking you, but because your mind is losing its old reference points. It no longer knows how to define you, and when the mind loses definition, it panics. That panic often disguises itself as doubt. You may begin to question your direction. You may wonder if you're doing enough. You may feel disconnected from purpose. You may feel strangely numb at times. But numbness in this phase is not emptiness. It is recalibration. Your system is learning how to exist without constant emotional spikes, without drama, without attachment to outcomes, without depending on external validation for stability. This is where real inner strength is formed, not the kind that reacts, the kind that remains. It is here that many people unknowingly sabotage themselves. The stillness feels unfamiliar, so they rush back to noise. They seek distraction, they chase stimulation, they reattach to old habits or relationships simply to feel something again. And when they do, the exhaustion returns. Because the soul had already moved forward. True spiritual maturity requires staying with this quiet phase long enough for clarity to emerge on its own. Not forcing meaning, not demanding answers, just allowing the internal realignment to complete itself. This is difficult because it requires trust. Trust that you are not lost. Trust that the silence has purpose. Trust that you don't need to rush. Most of the exhaustion people feel in this stage comes from resisting the simplicity of what is being asked of them. You are not being asked to do more. You are being asked to stop fighting, to stop proving, to stop chasing, to stop measuring yourself against expectations that no longer fit. This is where you begin to understand something profound. Peace is not something you achieve. It is something that emerges when resistance ends. And that realization changes everything. You begin to conserve energy naturally. You stop leaking attention into unnecessary worry. You stop overthinking conversations that no longer matter. You stop replaying past mistakes. You stop imagining worst-case futures, not because you force yourself to stop, but because your mind no longer finds nourishment in those patterns. This is the beginning of inner stability, a stability that does not depend on circumstances, a stability that does not collapse under pressure, a stability that remains even when life feels uncertain. And from this stability, clarity begins to grow. You start to sense what aligns with you and what doesn't. You start to feel when something is wrong without needing to analyze it. You start to recognize which paths drain you and which restore you. This intuitive clarity is one of the greatest outcomes of spiritual battle. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply feels certain. And with that certainty comes a quiet confidence. Not arrogance, not ego, but grounded presence. You stop chasing validation because you no longer need it. You stop explaining yourself because you understand yourself. You stop fearing silence because it has become your ally. This is the moment when exhaustion finally begins to lift. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily. You wake up one day and realize you feel lighter, not because your problems disappeared, but because they no longer control you. Not because life became easy, but because you became centered. This is the reward of enduring the inner war, not victory over others, not dominance, but mastery of self. And this mastery changes how you move through the world. You become less reactive, more discerning, more calm, more intentional. You stop wasting energy on things that don't matter. You stop feeding thoughts that drain you. You stop doubting your own inner voice. And when you reach this stage, something remarkable happens. The battle quiets. Not because it's over forever, but because you now understand it. You know when to rest. You know when to act. You know when to let go. You know when to stand firm. You no longer panic when tiredness appears. You no longer fear moments of confusion. You no longer interpret discomfort as failure. You see it for what it is, a signal, not a sentence. And this awareness gives you peace, real peace. The kind that doesn't depend on circumstances. The kind that remains even when life feels uncertain. The kind that comes from knowing you can face whatever comes next. If you've reached this point in your life, then you are further along than you realize. And if this message resonates with you, it means your awareness is already expanding beyond the surface. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, because in the next part, we will go even deeper into how to protect this inner stability, how to preserve your energy, and how to move forward without falling back into old patterns.